While we have land to labor, let us never wish to see our citizens occupied at the workbench. We have land enough for the thousandth and thousandth generations.
With these words, Thomas Jefferson laid out his vision for the future of America, populated by independent and self-sufficient family farmers. And with his Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson believed that he had provided the nation enough land for centuries to come. But in the years between 1860 and 1900, the nation of small towns, local crafts, family farms, and regional businesses became dominated by huge corporations, enormous commercial farms, and sprawling cities. By 1900, the United States was an economic colossus that produced close to one-third of the world's goods. It had grown from 31 to 76 million people, more and more of whom live not on farms, but in cities, who work not for themselves, but as wage earners for others. Jefferson would have been astonished by the changes the nation had undergone. Industrialization had brought about a revolution that permanently transformed the United States and the world. Industrialization was a complex process in which the shift of manufacturing from people to machines brought about a huge rise in production. In the decades following the end of the Civil War, a system of small and regional enterprises was pushed aside by powerful corporations, which used innovations in technology, organization, and financing to develop a rapidly growing, highly unstable national economic system. Linking it all together and accelerating its growth was the fire-belching iron horse.
I see over my own continent the Pacific Railroad surmounting every barrier. I see continual trains of cars winding along the Platte carrying freight and passengers. I hear locomotives rushing and roaring in the shrill steam whistle. I hear the echoes reverberate through the grandest scenery in the world, bridging the 3,000 and 4,000 miles of land travel, tying the eastern to the western sea.
When Leland Stanford hammered the final spike at Promontory Point, Utah, in May of 1869, a telegraph carried the momentous news to the awaiting nation. East and West were connected in a single transcontinental railroad. Railroad construction would continue for decades to come. Between 1865 and 1900, track mileage increased from 30,000 to more than 200,000 miles. This effort required huge amounts of money and land. The economic consequences were immense. The railroads opened new lands for settlement by making formerly remote areas accessible to the farmers, ranchers, and mining companies who would pour the natural resources of the South and West into eastern factories and cities of the East. Railroad construction required huge amounts of capital. Money from private investors was joined by generous support of federal and state governments, staunch supporters of expansion and business. The 131 million acres of public lands they received for their efforts included 1/4 of Minnesota and Washington, 1/5 of Kansas and Montana, and 1/8 of California.
If you could talk a town or a city government into wanting to have railroad tracks, they would lay down new railroad tracks. This stimulated jobs for people in a variety of areas.
The railroads forged together a national economy and opened the West for settlement and economic development. It fueled the growth of dozens of other industries like steel, coal, and timber, and it opened fresh lands for settlement and profit. In 1876, the city of Philadelphia threw the nation a big party for its 100th birthday, the Great Centennial Exposition. Machinery Hall was the centerpiece of the exposition. Visitors marveled at the demonstrations of sewing machines, assembly line shoe production, automatic corn huskers, and apple peelers, and machines to make hens lay eggs. They inspected state-of-the-art harvesters and plows, and watched wood pulp made into paper and power drills dig holes. At the center of it all, rising 30 feet into the air, loomed the 700-ton Corliss steam engine, which ran all of the exposition's 4,000 machines.
From the finite state of our glorious country, it looms up in power, the infinite master of this mechanic world.
American technologies and inventions were building an industrial system that would soon produce more goods faster than anywhere else on the earth. Alexander Graham Bell demonstrated his new telephone.
Well, in communications, the big news was the telephone. Now people could communicate with each other over distance instantly. So the telephone was something that transformed business, transformed daily life.
While visitors marveled at the new technologies demonstrated at the Centennial, Thomas Edison opened the Menlo Park Laboratory that would be the model for the modern business of invention. From his laboratory, he would give the world the phonograph and the electric light bulb. American inventors would file nearly 500,000 patents between the end of the Civil War and the dawn of the 20th century, transforming the economy and the way people lived. Modern machines, factories, and railroads required vast sums of money that no one person or private group of investors could provide, giving rise to a new form of business, the corporation.
People pooled their money, pooled their resources, and were able to therefore make themselves much more powerful than any one individual could have managed on their own. And with that power, they formed large corporations which exploited natural resources and exploited, too often, the workers who they brought in to do the labor for them.
In the past, while the factory sold its goods, what they're doing after the 1880s and 90s is not only selling their goods, but promoting and distributing their goods. Advertising, as we know it, develops in this period, and companies became their own advertisers. Companies also became their own distributors to make sure that the goods got out to the countryside.
The needs to have divisions of responsibilities, layers of supervisors, gives us bureaucracy. A large-scale, corporately owned, bureaucratically managed work organization. Once upon a time, the opportunity, if it happened, was to become your own master. Now the opportunity is to have a career within a large-scale firm, which you will never own.
By gaining control of each step of production, or by taking control of a market for a single product, a handful of corporations squeezed out smaller competitors.
Companies began to buy up one another, especially in the 1890s, with the result that many of the companies we know today begin to dominate their fields. Some of them grew large simply by hiring more workers. Others grew large by buying out the competition.
By the 1890s, Scottish immigrant Andrew Carnegie produced more than 60% of America's steel. And the Standard Oil Company of John D. Rockefeller, or Rockefeller as his critics called him, controlled 90% of the nation's petroleum business.
They were captains of industry. They did put together the first huge modern corporations. And they organized economic life in new ways that increased the overall wealth of the country.
Have not great merchants, great manufacturers, great inventors done more for the world than preachers and philanthropists? Can there be any doubts that cheapening the costs of necessities and conveniences of life is the most powerful agent of civilization and progress? Charles E. Perkins, president of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad.
But at the same time, they were robber barons in a way, because they took the lion's share of the wealth, and they were certainly great conspicuous spenders, living lavishly, lighting their cigars with $100 bills at lavish banquets and building huge mansions in Newport, Rhode Island, and so forth.
I am a citizen of the United States, born in the state of Vermont, producer of petroleum for over 30 years and refiner of same for 20 years. But my refinery has been shut down during the past 3 years owing to the powerful and all-prevailing machinations of the Standard Oil Trust in criminal collusion and conspiracy with the railroads to destroy my business of 20 years of patient industry, toil, and money.
When George Rice testified before the U.S. Industrial Commission in 1899, he spoke for many others who discovered that big business was no place for the weak of heart. Riches sometimes went to the boldest and least principled, such as railroad speculator Jay Gould, whose corrupt practices sank the Erie Railroad and set off a financial panic in 1873 that saw 5,000 businesses close their doors and 500,000 workers lose their jobs. Other captains of industry like Carnegie and Rockefeller would become philanthropists, devoting some of their vast personal fortune to the support of education, charities, and the arts. Whether these men did the country more good or harm, there was no doubt that industrialization was growing at a mind-boggling pace.
In 1875, we lagged behind the other industrializing nations, most notably Britain, Germany, and France. There was such spectacular industrial growth between 1875 and 1900 that in 1900 we were number one. And we were so far ahead number one that you could take